Time for the Tesla and Palantir weekly update, and I'll also include Coinbase for you guys since it is also breaking out. So with this weekly update, we're going to start off with Tesla here, and we're going to take a look at the linear scale chart and the linear scale fibs, and we can see that the 618, the 295.05 is continuing to hold as a support. So we can see since price really broke out right here on May 5th, it just went straight up to the 786 fib, got rejected week after week after week after week. And then finally, it just decided to come back down and retest support zones. And since that time, we actually never have closed a weekly candle below that 618. So the trend is still your friend. That price wants to continue to stabilize and maintain support. Not only that, it's also doing higher lows. Basically, ever since the bottom here in April of 2024, it's just higher low, higher low, higher low, higher low, higher low. And yes, this is still a higher low than before back in early June. So there's really nothing bearish about this chart at all. Support is still holding. We can even put on the moving averages as well and take a look here that the 50-week moving average is still maintaining as support as well, right? We can even go back to when it first broke out back on April 21st, and since then it has never closed a weekly candle below that 50-week moving average either, the green line. And the trend is your friend. So both case scenarios, right? 295, the 50-week moving average, still holding as support. The only thing that we see that's not so exciting is that it's stopped closing inside of the weekly Ichimoku cloud. The bottom of the cloud, it did barely just miss it. We can zoom in here. You can see it. It did not close above. And the trend has been for the past month that it has been closing inside. So that is one thing that's a little bit different this week, but I would just call it more of a rounding error than anything else. It's nothing too much to worry about because the main trend is higher lows, staying above the 618 fib, staying above the 50-week moving average, and that trend is your friend, right? So we're not going to battle the trend. This is not a bearish chart. All that happened is price went up to the 786 fib, got rejected, came back down to the 618, which happens to a lot of charts out there, not just Tesla, right? If it can't break resistance, it comes back down to find support, sometimes over and over again. And in this case, it went to the 618 fib over and over again. So this is still our support, right? 295, 303, this whole zone right here with some liquidity below it is our support zone, and that is not changing. This is still a very bullish chart, and once it can actually start to close back above this 321.32, then we can get excited again and start talking about higher levels to the 330s, 340s, and then maybe when the time is right, it'll be able to break this 347.58 and then continue to the 370s and the 400s above. But right now, we're still range bound, and this range is really in between the 321.32 and the 295. This is nothing has changed, right? This has been our range for a while, so it's nothing bearish, and I expect maybe in the weeks to come we can start challenging this 321.32 one more time and then try to break through and get more bullish. And next we have Palantir here. So Palantir, this is the linear scale chart. I think this is the only chart I really need right now because it's telling a story. And the story is it went straight up to the 3.618 linear based fib, 147.31, and which is also coinciding with the top arc here. And for 2 weeks now, basically 2 weeks ago and this current week, it did go to the top arc and get rejected. But you notice the trend that's really happening now is the bottom arc is really holding as a support. So since we're going to pay attention to this bottom arc as maintaining support, that is around 134. Next week, that'll be around 134. So if you're looking for a support for Palantir, that's it, right? So it's range bound still, 134 up to the 145 zone and a big resistance at 147.31. Not only that, we can also go to the Ichimoku and we can see that the conversion line right here, the blue line on that chart is 131.61. So if it did need to get a little bit more liquidity below that arc, it's okay to touch that. But this is essentially waiting for this conversion line to catch up to price. You can kind of see how extended it used to be way down here. See the blue line right here, and then price was up here. But now this blue line is getting closer and closer to price. So I think that's all I was waiting for, just not getting too overextended from that conversion line so it's able to catch up. And then now that it's caught up, I think it might be able to establish a little base here on the bottom arc. and perhaps even in the weeks to come, try to challenge that 147 and this 145 zone as resistance. So once I start to see weekly candles basically close above this arc here, which next week is around 145, then I think it's time to start challenging the 147 and maybe even head to the green level of the GAN up here around the 168. But there is some resistance before that 158 or 168. There is this log-based fib right here at the 157.62. So this is still going to be our big main resistance before we get into the 160s or the 170s. So this is going to be my next main huge target to try to overcome. So the closer it does get there, though, the more cautious I got to be, because sometimes when it gets to the 1.618, we could see some kind of big liquidity grab or just sell off just to go down to some lower levels and retest it. And that lower level could actually end up being into like the 118s, 115s, 120s in the future, but not right now, right? I think still price wants to gravitate higher first before lower. But just when it gets closer to the 157.62, I need to be a little bit closer or a little bit more cautious, because it's a big log-based fib. The 1.618 is huge, right? It's a very important number. So this is something that needs to be cautious with until it can actually be overcome. So right now, very bullish chart. We're just seeing this 135 zone continue to hold as support. And as long as this 134, 135 zone continues to hold as support, I think it'll be keep building a base until it's ready to continue the journey higher. And now it's time for Coinbase here. And Coinbase, we're going to do the linear scale fibs as well. And I wanted to show you the big development of what's really happening with this chart. And it's the 886 fib right here, the 384.17. So this is something that is important to pay attention to see if price can actually stay above it. And the reason why it's important is because it has never, ever closed any candle in history above this 384. In fact, it's never even opened a candle above this level, 384.17, in history. Going back, even during the IPO, the candle opened back here at 380, right? So it was around 381, and it wicked way up here, but it never opened or closed a candle in history above it. So this is the highest weekly candle close ever, and the first time ever staying above for a week of this 384.17. So because of that, it's going to be a super important number to try to maintain. I do want to see if this can hold next week. So this is going to be my target to see if support can hold. Now, if it can hold, then great. We can maybe see some continuation higher. One thing I did want to point out, though, is if I just take off all these indicators here, we can maybe just put on the Bollinger Band and just see what's really happening, because it is getting a little bit extended on the top of the band, and that's at 368.37. So if we are going to maybe do some kind of a back test, it might even wick through that 384 next week and maybe even head back into the 360s to retest that upper Bollinger Band, because if it gets too far extended, then it usually can experience some volatility. And we did see that before, right? It got pretty extended back in June 23rd, and then it came back and really went back down to the 330s again before continuing higher. So we could see some volatility next week in that regard until it's really ready to go to all-time highs. Also, I have a linear scale GAN box I want to show you. Not the GAN square, but the GAN box. This is the first time I'm showing this publicly. And I do have a lesson on my Patreon tier 4 about it. So this is all about resistance right now. And resistance is here. This green level, all of these angles, yes, there's a lot of information on the screen, but essentially every downward sloping, upward sloping, horizontal line is a resistance or a support zone, right? We can see back in the past, this downward sloping was a resistance. We can see this downward sloping resistance, 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 flipping to support. You can just see how price interacts with all of these angles. And right now, the important thing to pay attention to is this green level here, and that's at 390, 390.40 basically. This green horizontal level, it got rejected, and it did not close above. So we are in a battle of big resistance and perhaps support for next week. So would I expect price to just skyrocket next week? I don't think so, right? I think what we're going to experience, since we are getting a little bit extended from the upper Bollinger Band, I think we could even just go wick through this 384 next week and maybe get to the 360s again and maybe retest that. So I would be a little bit cautious up here because there is some confluence of being overextended with the Bollinger Band, and also it's at a big resistance zone according to my Gann box. So this 390, 391 zone, really huge to try to break above. If by some reason we can gap up on Monday, maybe at 395, 396, and open a weekly candle above everything, then perhaps what I just said, we do not need to go back and retest. We can just continue on towards all-time highs. But it all kind of determines how we open up on Monday. If we open up above at 395, we can go higher. But if we gap down a little bit next week and open below this 384, then this 384 is going to still be a resistance. And if it's still a resistance, then it has a potential to even retest a little bit lower before trying to break higher, and maybe even lower than that 368 number as well. So we'll take it one day, 1 week at a time, and I'm really curious to see how Monday's weekly candle is going to open, whether it's going to be a gap up above levels or just still below levels, or even a gap down below this 384.17 for a potential to retest even lower. So with all that said, I am still a little bit cautious in this zone because it looks to me more as a resistance zone than a support zone. So I'm not going to let this candle close above it fool me. I'm just going to take it 1 week at a time and just see how the momentum follows, the follow through of the momentum next week is. I want to see if it can actually continue the momentum higher or if it wants to retest. So I'm more cautious at these levels than anything else. So with that, guys, let's just pay attention to 1 day at a time, and until we really get above this 391 to 395 zone, I'm going to be cautious on Coinbase.